Hello, and welcome to Elves, Rings, and Nerdy Things, Episode 6. I am your co-host, Sam Marvin, here with Sean. Sean, why don't you say hi?
Hey, happy to be here. Excited to talk about episode 6 of Rings of Power.
Happy to be here as well. Before we jump into it, just quick plugs for our Facebook page, Elves, Rings, and Nerdy Things. We also have an email address if social media is not your bag. That email address is elvesringsnerdythings@gmail.com. As always, if you are a listener, please make sure that you give us a rating and a review on your podcast catcher. Also, come to our Facebook page, give us a like, and engage with some of our content on that platform.
Hey, you can find us basically on any streaming service. We have Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, some more obscure ones that I only learned about by being a host of a podcast and trying to get it onto other platforms. But you can find us almost anywhere. Like Sam said, we're looking for feedback. If you know anybody who might be interested in fantasy or Lord of the Rings, please send our podcast their way. It helps us out, keeps people engaged. Hopefully this is worthy of your time. Thank you for the repeat listeners. We found out we currently have repeat listeners in both Ireland and the UK. So thank you to our European subscribers and listeners.
We are international.
We have become international, and you Canadian listeners out there. We were international before the UK and Ireland, but we are global now, or more global.
I don't consider Canada to be international. I can get there in 10 minutes and they're south of me.
It would take me about 2.5 hours north to get to British Columbia, but yeah, you're a lot closer than I am, but I'm still pretty close.
That's right. And then finally, real quick spoiler disclaimer for the Rings of Power TV show, the Lord of the Rings and Hobbit movie trilogies, and then, of course, all of the J.R.R. Tolkien books. So if you like what you hear today and you have not read those, we advise you to read those. Great books, always worth a reread, but spoilers for all of that media.
And we currently have a Facebook post. Rings of Power will not last forever. We are almost done with season 1. And Sam and I are trying to plan what our next series is going to be. There's currently a post on our Facebook page, Elves, Rings, and Nerdy Things. We basically have it down to The Witcher season 1, Andor, House of the Dragon, and a fantasy book club. If there's one of those that interests you the most, please hop onto our Facebook page on that post, or you can email us, elvesringsnerdythings@gmail.com, and let us know which of those 4 you would prefer. And that would help us plan as we get ready for the next series of the podcast.
With that, we are going to jump into our recap. Episode 6 is titled Udûn, and it focused exclusively on the actions, the activities in the Southlands. We get a union of the Southlands, Numenor, and Galadriel storylines. The episode begins with Adar planting seeds and talking about defiance in the face of death. He then gives a speech to his assembled orcs in which he describes their future, in which they are free and have a home of their own. Waldreg is seen in this crowd. Adar and his orcs with Waldreg march to the tower, which seems abandoned. They commence a search, and Arondir appears, shooting a flaming arrow into a rope holding together a metal structure which was keeping the tower upright. The tower collapses, killing many orcs and potentially Adar and Waldreg. We cut to the villagers back in their village, having escaped from the tower. We then cut to the Numenorian ships. Isildur shares an apple with Beric the horse, and then throws it into the ocean, and then has a conversation with Galadriel. Elendil comes over and speaks briefly with Isildur, who then leaves. Elendil talks to Galadriel about the rising and the setting sun. Elendil then tells the queen that they are 2 days out from the tower, and she says to make haste. We cut back to the village where Bronwyn and Arondir motivate the villagers for the coming fight with the orcs. They fortify the village and prepare for the attack. Arondir hides the hilt and does not let anyone, even Bronwyn, know where it is. After this, Arendir and Bronwyn share a moment and they kiss. Arendir says he wants a future with her and Theo. There is more talk of seeds and defiance in the face of death. The orcs begin their attack that night. The villagers initially trap the orcs with fire and then kill many with arrows and spears. Arendir gets into a fist fight with a big orc in which Bronwyn saves him. And then they discover that some of the dead are not orcs, but actually their fellow villagers who had joined Adar. After this, more orcs attack, shooting arrows into the crowd. Many villagers are killed, and Bronwyn is badly injured. The survivors retreat into the tavern. Theo and Arendir use the flower seeds to cauterize Bronwyn's wound, which saves her. After this, Adar and the orcs break into the tavern. They demand the hilt. Several villages are killed before Theo uncovers the hilt and turns it over to Adar. Everyone, villagers, orcs, Adar alike, in the tavern hears the earth starting to shake as if hundreds of horse hooves are speeding towards them.
Then in the second half of the episode, the Númenóreans appear to have arrived just in time to save the Southlanders in the inn. A battle ensues, led by Galadriel, Hellbrand, and Elendil. Queen Muriel allows Isildur to enter the battle as she is watching it take place from a hillside. Adar tells Waldrig he has a task for him as they exit the inn. Galadriel and Hallbrand follow Adar after Arondir tells them Adar is the leader of the orcs. Galadriel and Arondir subdue Adar after a short chase through the woods. The good guys end up winning, and we cut to Galadriel questioning Adar, where we learn a little bit about his backstory, that he may be one of the first corrupted elves by Morgoth. Adar claims to have killed Sauron because Sauron was sacrificing orcs in his mission to create a powerful artifact, and that is a callback to the first episode where Galadriel goes into that tower in Faradwaith in the frozen north, and we see those orcs kind of frozen into the walls. Adar claims to have killed Sauron. Hallbrand accepts the title of King of the Southlands. His people then are shown celebrating him at the end of the conflict. The Númenóreans and the Southlanders are drinking and eating together. At this point, Arondir has a conversation with Theo. Theo realizes that the hilt is no longer the hilt. It has been replaced with a small hand axe. Then we cut to Waldreg placing the hilt into the keyhole back in the tower. This triggers a dam to collapse. The water behind the dam then goes through all of those tunnels built by the orcs and slaves in earlier episodes. The water goes into a magma chamber underneath the volcano, hits the magma, and causes Orodruin to erupt. In one of the final scenes of the episode, we see a pyroclastic flow and ash covering our good guys. And that is the end of the episode. Now, Sam, I will start by saying I think episode 5 was the worst of the season, and we have an improvement in episode 6. I actually found myself enjoying this one a lot more than episode 5. Just initial thought from you. How did you feel overall before we get into our commentary?
Overall, I would agree. I think in our review of episode 5, we stated that we each felt the Southlands was the best of the plot lines, the most interesting. And I complained that we didn't spend enough time there. This episode
was entirely there.
I enjoyed that. We had some great action scenes. We had some nice character moments. However, some of that was diminished by things that were seemingly, again, very weird character decisions. Again, I think
let's take that. Yeah. So character decisions, that leads us off into our first. So for me right now, the character that I most sympathize with is our villain.
Okay.
Adar, in this episode, we learn more about him as a person or as a character. If he is one of the first elves to be corrupted by Morgoth. He has been subjected to countless torture, terrors that might explain the burns on his face. We discover that he apparently, quote unquote, killed Sauron because Sauron was basically using orcs as just materials to be used for his magical artifact, which could be like a precursor to the ring that he was trying to develop. And he's trying to find a home for these creatures that have been enslaved and abused and misused. And the character that the writers are trying to get me to invest in this episode, says that she wants to commit genocide and kill every orc just because they exist.
And not just commit genocide. And she says this to the person who is seemingly a progenitor of the orcs in some ways, who's acting as this father figure, refers to them as his children, wants to give them a home. She says to him, I will keep you alive so that you can witness this. And then I will kill all of your children, wipe them off the face of the earth. And then he says something that goads her. And then she kind of forgets that she said she was going to keep him alive and moves to kill him. Only to be
stopped by Halbrand.
Halbrand again, which was a reverse of the earlier interaction between Halbrand, Galadriel, and Adar, where Halbrand was about to kill him and Galadriel intervened. So to your point of the character that they want us to like, theoretically the protagonist of the show, the hero of the show, is a genocidal, temperamental, attempted murderer.
So I'll say this, after reading the Lord of the Rings books and Peter Jackson's trilogy, I never in a million years would have thought that this show and like the creation of Mordor, I would be in favor of Mordor being created as a home for these orcs.
Yeah.
Like I'm all for it. I'm like, of course they deserve a home.
You also, sorry, you were going to say something.
Oh no, I was just going to ramble, please.
Well, so it's interesting there are some things in the show that we've talked about, and we have a topic today of how the show, it kind of fits the modern fantasy audience. It's very much a departure from Tolkien and the depictions of Tolkien we've seen before when it comes to brutality and potentially gray moral characters. But something that an area where it seemingly departs from Tolkien is in the giving motivations to the villains that are understandable in many ways. And it's just it's a very far departure from the orcs and goblins are pure evil and you can kill them and they're nameless, anonymous things. And I think even Adar says they all have names, they have a right to live. He mentions the one that's a reference to Eru Ilúvatar, the overall creator deity in Tolkien's world. And so Galadriel's assertions about eradicating all of them is in that context, and it just comes off like just completely unhinged. Yeah. And if there weren't so many other times when I call into question the judgment and just the sense of the writers, I would say, okay, this is setting something up, but it may just be they don't understand the juxtapositions that they're inserting into their own show.
Because Sauron and Morgoth, up to this point, like Morgoth's whole thing was, I'm going to sow dissent into the Song of Ilúvatar.
Yeah.
And this is how it's being written, and I'm going to corrupt and make what's good bad. And I'll say, like I said at the beginning of this, I love that they're giving Adar and making me feel for him. But the counter writing to that for Galadriel and the Númenóreans, I'm just like, you got to come up with something different, because having like you said, your protagonist just basically tell them, yeah, I'm going to commit genocide and torture you and do these things. It's a complete reverse of what the Tolkien writing should be.
Yeah.
And I'm not opposed to Adar being me feeling sympathy for him. I like that they're making me feel conflicted as the viewer, but your writing for Galadriel has to be better.
Mhm.
You can't make me root against her. And that's what they're doing.
There are so many other things that she could have said in that moment to justify her feelings. She could have talked about, I mean, she had the dagger, her brother's dagger in her hand, right? She could have talked about how you took everything from me. We could have had flashbacks to the, aftermath of some of the battles in the first stage and all of the elves that died, right? We could have been reminded about why she feels the way that she does. And she could have said something like, your desire to give the orcs a homeland doesn't mean that you can murder all these innocent villagers. They didn't do anything to you. You don't have a right to evict them from lands that they've, held for 1,000 years. There's so many other things that you could go to instead of, genocide and murder.
Yeah. So that was a good thing and a bad thing for me for this episode. Good Adar writing, bad Galadriel writing. Sam, your first reaction, I see in the notes you wrote, just so to give people a little insight into our note sheet that we use on our Google Drive. Sam wrote, soldiers not acting like soldiers, peasants become soldiers overnight, bad tactics, bad decisions. What do you mean by that?
Okay. So again, I think we mentioned this in the last episode, that Tolkien was very deliberate when crafting his world, and then he would hide a lot of the rules that would underline it. So Boromir, Boromir.
What the fuck?
Sorry. For those of you, I also, from time to time, I will play Grand Strategy. I am usually the Duke of Barcelona, the King of Aragon, and then I go on to create the Empire of Hispania in Crusader Kings. I spent a lot of time with Aragon.
I'm the one who edits this podcast. I'm leaving this in. He needs to be shamed for saying Aragon.
I'm thinking of the Kingdom of Aragon. Anyway, so you have soldiers, you have leaders, you have individuals who are devising strategy in the Lord of the Rings, but we don't need to see them sitting around devising strategy, but we can see the outcomes of that. They make sound decisions that are reasonable given the circumstances and what they know. In this show, the opposite is seemingly true, where the Arendir, Bronwyn, and the villagers abandon a fortified position in favor of an unfortified position, which is open to attack from all sides, being the village as opposed to the tower.
And so much harder to defend, too.
So much harder to defend. You've got you abandon stone structures for wooden structures when you know that the enemy has easy access to fire.
Thatched roof cottages.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. Yes. There's a scene at the end when all of the villagers are in the tavern, and this goes to not just Arendir not acting like a soldier. Any of the orcs, Adar, they don't do the very obvious thing where if you're willing to kill all of these people, you don't need to beat the door down and then hold them at knife point. Just set the roof on fire, have the thing collapse, all of the villagers die, and then you can sift through the ashes.
I'll say the one thing I disagree with that, it does seem tactical to try to get information. And they've kind of made a point too with Adar where he's offering them chances to come over to his side. So I think I would have been a little put off if he's all of a sudden like, all right, let's just slaughter everybody and then sift through the stuff later.
To me, it would have been a perfectly fine escalation because he just lost a bunch of his orcs in the attack on the tower. And he just lost a bunch of his orcs in the attack on the village. And so...
Well, he lost a bunch of humans in the initial attack. They pretty much dominated once it was his orcs taking over.
Well, there were a lot of orcs in that first wave. And it was a lot of orcs who did die in the attack on the tower. So I feel like the abandonment of the tower in favor of the village, and then the decision not to just leave. The humans and Arendir could just leave. They could take the hilt and get as far away as possible. It seems like in this situation, if they have no food, if they decide to abandon their fortified position, just head in the opposite direction of the orcs.
That's where I agree with you.
And it's especially since we know that they want the hilt.
And that's the point too, is Arondir doesn't know what they're going to do with the hilt. So if I'm him, and I'm the only elf in the Southlands. Why do I want to stick around with the hilt to find out what they want to do with it?
And he even says to Theo after the battle, give it to the Numenorians and they'll toss it in the ocean on their way back to Numenor. Well, we just established in the episode that you're only about a day's ride away from the river, and then that's only about a day's sail from the ocean. So, hey, Arendir, start walking, and you could be at the river, and then you could be near the ocean, and that hilt could be underwater with your, you could have done that weeks ago. Anyway, peasants becoming soldiers overnight. This is a standard trope in a lot of fantasy stuff where people who right before the battle have had no experience that we know of in combat.
Not just fantasy though. This is like any medieval. I've seen like films where, not to pick on Braveheart, but you have like individuals that all of a sudden are like, oh yeah, we're going to be a serviceable military force after not doing anything beforehand.
Now, I will say this: the thing that I did really like was when the peasants come out and they start fighting with spears and like sharpened sticks. I was like, yes, thank you. That is good, because that is something that is often completely underrepresented, which is the incredible effectiveness of the spear, very primitive weapon in combat. But like the peasants who are shooting arrows from the roof of the buildings in the middle of the night, just hitting orc after orc after orc, having not established whatsoever that these people are marksmen, beggars belief. And I can overlook that. It's just another one of those things where we didn't have to get to this point. You could have just left. The cavalry charge could have come in a way to save all of the peasants from their being surrounded by orcs or something like that. If you wanted to have the Numenorians save all the peasants, you could have done it in a multitude of ways. It's just another one of those things where the characters in the show don't act like somebody in that position would have acted. And the first time I watched it, I was instantly just given vibes of, this is just a 12-year-old dungeon master coming up with something that sounds cool because he just read the Helm's Deep chapter of Lord of the Rings and wants to do his own version of Helm's Deep. The other thing that kind of struck me was like, it's like if Andy Dwyer, the character Andy Dwyer from Parks and Rec, wrote like a medieval fantasy scene. Like, it just doesn't, people do cool things because they need people to do cool things, not because it makes any sense. So that was just kind of it. The action was fun, the action was good, but it was in service. It was the result of bad decisions that people in this position probably would not be making.
But at least the action was good.
Yeah.
Like, if the poor decisions would have led to bad action, I would have been pissed. And I know there's a lot of people complaining about some of the action with like Galadriel on horseback doing that thing where she fell to the side. I don't know if any of you have been to the Washington Renaissance Festival, but there's a show there called Equestrian Chaos. And there are some women who do the exact moves that Galadriel was doing on horseback. So it is possible.
But I had no problem with that whatsoever. I did have a problem with the completely pointless fist fight between Arendir and that big orc.
He knew he wouldn't have come away on top in that. So why did he continue to fist fight?
It was also so perfect. The direction was because he had been on top of a building shooting arrows, and then an orc came up and attacked. The orc killed the guy next to him and then attacked him. He fought that guy off and then was pulled off of the roof by another orc. He kills that orc and then is standing there, and it's like a perfect horror like slasher scene construction where you have the character looking in one direction and not looking in the other direction. The camera slowly pans so we get more of the shot behind the character. And then, of course, into the frame walks this gigantic orc who seems to be the only orc that doesn't have a knife or a sword or anything that he could have just stabbed Arendir in the back with, and it would have been fight over. So then, of course, they need to have their ridiculous fist fight, where it would have been nice here to see this, have some consistency with this elf actually, holding his own in a fist fight with an orc. Elves have been established to be relatively good combatants, except seemingly for this instance. It was just so hackneyed, and it's overly long too. It was just a
long sequence. I'll give you that. But in terms of, we'll transition this into like, my next point is brutality. And there's a moment in that fight where Arondir stabs the orc in the eye, and the orc takes it out of his eye, and then you see the open eye wound, and he's got blood dripping off of it onto Arondir's face. He's about to stab Arondir. The scenes in the inn of, like you mentioned, those villagers being killed by Adar and the orcs, that's like a very slow sword being put into a stomach. Like, they were showing everything. The beginning of the battle with Bronwyn, the woman next to her gets her throat slit, and it's just like, man, I'll say, in terms of, is this what a modern audience is looking for? It is. And I'll say I enjoy it, that it's brutal. To me, it gives me more higher stakes, I guess, when you see characters just being like on screen, not like a lot of times where they take a scene like that, and like they did it with Waldrig and Theo's friend.
Oh, Rowan.
Rowan. We can assume that Waldrig killed Rowan, but they didn't put it on screen. I feel like a lot of other Tolkien materials would take a scene like that and then have it be insinuated. But this show is very much, a lot of the time, putting it right on the screen and showing you the brutality of orcs. And that part I'm enjoying so far.
Yeah, I know there's a criticism out there that this is not Tolkien. This is not a story that Tolkien told. They're departing so much from Legendarium. Tolkien's violence was not like this on the page, and even in the on-screen depictions. This is way more of a modern depiction of violence. When it comes to just what I'm seeing on screen, I like it a lot. I am not someone who cares so much about being faithful in every aspect of the original material where this is going to bother me. I do think that I am glad that a character that we actually care about, finally faced a serious consequence, meaning Bronwyn getting shot with the arrows, and there actually being a tense moment where she was seemingly going to die unless they did something, and then they actually saved her.
Those cauterizing scenes, I was like, oh my, this is rated R. Like,
I will say this again, you've got to do the work on this. Those cauterizations were superficial and her bleed was deep. So, like, good job stenching what you can see, but she's just bleeding out internally now.
True. But in terms of like what they actually were willing to show, I was like, if this was a film, this would be rated R for sure with some of the stuff that they're showing.
So the other thing that I wanted to talk about when it comes to the battle and some of the construction, there were 3 other instances of a fantasy battle that I was reminded of: Helm's Deep, Pelennor Fields, and the Battle of the Bastards in Game of Thrones. In all of those occasions, the characters that we care about are aware of the stakes, and it has been set up so that we know that there is this force out there that can come to the rescue, and some of the characters know that force is out there, and that is what is motivating the tension. So in Helm's Deep, in the movie, we have Gandalf and Éomer. Gandalf says, in 3 days, look to the east. On dawn on the 3rd day, look to the east. And then he shows up, and that's what saves the day. Pelennor Fields, we have Gandalf and Pippin, mainly Pippin, lighting the torch, or lighting the signal towers. We know that Rohan is coming. There's urgency in that ride. We have Theoden, saying we leave in 3 days. Every rider has to, prepare to ride overnight, leave everything that we can. In the Battle of the Bastards, we establish the army of the Knights of the Vale. We see Sansa writing the letter. We can assume that it's summoning the Knights of the Vale. We don't know that that's necessary. That Jon Snow and his team doesn't know that that's coming, and they fight as if they don't know that's coming. So that is more of a kind of out of the blue. But it is
we're gonna die Let's just
Yes.
fight to the death. That's like a Theoden charge at that.
Yes. In all of these cases, though, the rescue force knows what they're getting into, and they are, they've been summoned, or they know that that there is this event that they have to go intervene. And the defending force either knows that that is coming, or some of the characters know that it's coming, or they don't, and they act like they don't. So in this case, the villagers don't know that there's this force of Numenorians coming, so they proceed as they normally would. But the Numenorians are acting with all of this haste, but there's nothing motivating it. There's been no recon, there has been no communication. There's just this urgency in it, comes when they're sailing up the river, when they're riding, but we don't have any idea where that comes from. And so it's kind of, we get a certain amount of that relief because we've been with the villagers, seeing what they're going through, but then the relief force comes in and it's not properly set up. So you get the payoff with none of the setup. And I think that also came in with the collapse of the tower, which ultimately was not as epic as it could have been. You actually called this in one of our earlier episodes.
The last episode, yeah.
Yeah, and I didn't really pick up on that they were hinting that the tower would be collapsed onto the orcs.
Yeah, you gave me a look when I said it on the video, like I was full of shit. But
well, I mean, you picked up on it, you called it. Again, I disagree tactically with the abandonment of the tower in the first place. It was a very defensible,
totally. Yeah.
very defensible position. And then even there were certain scenes like, how did all of the villagers get out of the tower when the orcs were seemingly walking up the one pathway to it? And then we had Arendir jumping down onto that bridge, pulling that chain to block the doors from the inside, which I thought was really cool. But what happened to that huge line of orcs that was on the bridge that didn't come into the courtyard? It's just little things like that, which are
they made the force seem a lot bigger than what could fit inside of that small garrison tower. But now that you're talking about this more, it is bothering me more and more that Galadriel, Halbrand, the Numenorians had no idea what was going on in the Southlands. So they just randomly appear at this village at the perfect timing without any insight as to what's happening.
Correct.
So now that's bothering me.
More. They were going for the tower, and all of a sudden then they start going to the village. And granted, those two things are very close to one another, but it again, it's did they see the script to the episode and know that they needed to ride really quickly and go to the village instead of proceed as an army normally would, which is don't wear out your horses running at full speed for an entire day unless you know you absolutely have to. Anyway, some of those things which just erode at your ability to enjoy what you're seeing on the screen, which again is good action. I thought in many cases the music really heightened the sense of adventure and the sense of celebration at the end. Like I thought that that little, the feast that they had was really well done. Although where'd they get all that food from? Because
they were struggling for food.
Weren't they running out of food? Anyway. Yes,
see, but that's where we get too nitpicky though.
Yeah. Again, I feel like it would be nitpicky if otherwise the show were doing everything right. But there are so many instances with weird character decisions, bad dialogue. We've talked about some of the strange visuals where I don't think they get the benefit of the doubt in some of these things.
Transitioning to my last topic that I wanted to cover, and it's kind of more in that poor writing, poor decision-making realm. If you watch the episode, we have like the whole storyline in the Southlands and Tir Harad has been centered around this hilt. Many of the main characters in this region of the story have interacted with and held the hilt at this point. Galadriel and Halbrand are able to chase down Adar, grab the wrapped up package, whatever it is. They go back, they basically interview Adar, like they drill him with questions, they go through all this stuff. Galadriel then gives it to Arondir. Arondir has it in his possession for a while. There's a feast. Arondir has a conversation with Theo. And then finally, when Theo gets this in his hand, he holds it and he goes, something doesn't feel right about the weight of this. And that's when we find out, or our main characters discover that they don't actually have the hilt. So I just find it hard to believe that like all of these different characters, wouldn't check to see what it was. Like if Arondir tells Galadriel, he has this thing, you have to stop him.
Mm-hmm.
And she goes and chases him down, collects it. And she's not going to be like, oh, the enemy that I've been looking for probably hundreds of years, it wants this artifact. I'm not going to look to see what it is.
Yeah. And then she goes and interrogates him. You think maybe one of the first questions would be, what is this? But no, I mean, does she doesn't even have the package at that point. Doesn't Halbrand have it with him when he walks in to the barn? I don't recall the specifics.
That's the details in that. Yeah, I don't remember verbatim what happens, but yeah, just the fact that like all of these characters, and then it takes the kid who's held it like a couple times to just be like, oh no, this isn't it. Yeah. And it's not like it was close. It's like a wooden shaft with an axe head on it, like a small axe.
It would have felt completely different than
it wouldn't have felt like
a metal hilt. Yes.
Yeah. So that's my big thing. And then my closing thing with Galadriel, and then I'll let you go to your last topic, is just, I know the geologists and the volcanologists are probably upset that some water or large amounts of water caused Orodruin to erupt. I'm not going to nitpick on the geology of that and just say that I'll suspend disbelief, and that's how it erupts for one of the first times. But the final scene where like Galadriel is just standing in the middle of the pyroclastic flow, I'm like, come on.
So I do have a problem with water causing a volcanic eruption, because again, this is what we talked about last episode with the mystery box, right? We've opened the mystery box about the hilt. It's literally a key. It was called a key. It's literally a key to a Indiana Jones-ish device to open up a dam, which was underneath the tower. Like, and who built this tower, by the way? I thought the elves built the tower when they came here to monitor the humans, but in fact, no, it was built prior to them by Morgoth or Sauron.
I think it was the Southlanders. I've never had an inkling that the elves built it. I think the elves, and to me, you get that with those first episodes with Arondir and talking to his battalion chief. Like the fact that the tower is being held up by those iron bands and rope, it seemed not as good of a make as the elves. And I think the elves put like the cap on the tower, but there was so much of it that didn't seem like elvish make to me that I never once thought, I always thought it was like a human Southlander, that the elves were just using it. But that
okay. Maybe I wasn't watching with the right eyes, but again, this goes back to setup and payoff. If not only do we have the carving that displays to everyone that this is a very powerful artifact, but then it's actually the keyhole that you need to set into motion this big flow of water. All of the stuff then has been planned for however long the tower has been around, which, if we can go based on the timeline of Elven occupation, is at least 1,000 years. We don't really know what the timeline is, so maybe that's, theoretically around the end of the first age, if we think that the elves have been there since Morgoth was defeated, and that's how long it's been since the humans were allied with him. But we don't get any dialogue from the elves saying that, this tower predates us. It's, it used to be a fortress when these people were allied with Morgoth. We don't get any explanation. It would have been appropriate to revisit that when we had the reveal of the hilt on the carving, but we don't get any of that. Instead, it's
that would have been perfect for a cutscene of like their Southlander ancestors building and like worshiping Morgoth.
Yes.
And like you could show us like Morgoth in the instance, or like the outline like they did. They could have made that brutally awesome.
Yep.
But yeah, that's a good point.
All of this was seemingly done all of this was in service of getting the volcano to erupt, which we know now it's going to blot out the sky. It gives the orcs a home because the sun is such a nuisance to them, which again is something that we didn't really talk about it a ton, but you know, in the canon, the orcs don't like the sun. It doesn't cause their skin to burn. They're not vampires. Blotting out the sun is an important step in allowing orcs to move about freely. But we see in the show the orcs are willing and able to go into the sun. The one orc exposes his arm because Adar asks him to. You think that if they were highly motivated, like to recover the sword hilt, the sun wouldn't interfere with that. And they have the cloaks and all the other stuff. Mm-hmm. So just, you know, tons of these, again, little inconsistencies. And then we live in a world where seemingly there is magic. The sword hilt itself is magic. Can we not have any of that in play when it comes to creating the volcanic eruption? I saw a theory out there that this, and I'm going to give credit to In Deep Geek, which is a YouTube channel. The guy's really good. He knows his stuff inside and out. He's made a couple of predictions or voiced some theories that I don't necessarily agree with. I think he's on the train that Halbrand is Sauron. He is one of the folks who thinks that the stranger is a Balrog. And he was theorizing that this season would end with the stranger being captured by those priests who are disciples of Sauron or servants of Sauron, and then they would sacrifice him in Mount Doom with the hilt, and that would trigger the eruption because, you know, Balrogs are these immensely powerful creatures of shadow and fire, and that would cause. And I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. I don't buy that he's a Balrog. But if that was within the universe of the show, that would be the type of thing that you would need to trigger an eruption out of nowhere. Like, we don't even have any hints that this is the first episode where maybe the second episode where we see that the volcano is so close. We get one reference to it earlier in the show, but if you don't know it's what Orodruin means, it would completely go over your head. So that was only something that book fans would read, or book fans would pick up on. And then it's like, it's so close that all this water can rush into it. Like, I don't know, newly dug trenches filled with water tend to turn into mud, right? Like it's just so many things where the real physics of the world are one thing. If you're going to have a completely like mundane explanation for why the mountain erupts, it needs to be much better. Like you almost can't have a mundane explanation for why the mountain erupts, because it requires like such this suspension of disbelief, as we've talked about before. And it's a step too far for me.
And your last point here, you asked the question, is the Southlands one village? All I'll say on this point is there's a scene when everybody is getting to the tower, when all the villagers are getting there, and Bronwyn has a comment of everyone from here to Orodruin has made it.
Yes.
And when they get to the battle, and I know some went to go join the orcs, but it seems like the same exact population of their village is there. So where did all these other people go and come from and go to? So that's one thing that I found problematic.
Yeah, I mean, and this is I think one of the issues that I can see with the show, which is you have the budget, you have the time. If you wanted to, you could demonstrate that there is this whole region that Halbrand is supposed to. I think we get a reference earlier in the show to all this former figure united all the various tribes of the Southlands. Okay, well, we've seen two villages. One of them was completely destroyed and all the people disappeared. Seemingly they were either killed or are still prisoners of the orcs. We have all of the survivors of the main village and then reference to survivors from these other villages. And Halbrand shows up and is declared king after one encounter in this one village. And there's even reference to wherever Halbrand was living before he fled. And we don't see that. We do get this interesting exchange between Halbrand and Adar, where I think Halbrand says, "Do you remember me?" And Adar says, "No. Did I cause you pain or cause pain to someone that you loved?" And we get a hint that there might have been a wife or a child that Halbrand used to have,
kid.
which I liked. But we could have spent more time here, and it would have solved some of the problems of the setup and the payoff of the rescuing these villagers if we had just give us one other location of people who are maybe a little bit further out and can say, "Oh yeah, we've seen some things, we've heard some rumors," and then we get like this first hint at legitimizing Halbrand, but then we get, oh, a survivor from this area says that these villagers are under attack, and then we can get the get the big save the day moment.
The one other village that we see has already been like burned to the ground, and everyone is either killed or enslaved.
Yeah.
And that's what sparks around here in Bronwyn to begin their journey.
Yeah. Yeah. It could have been a survivor from that village, or, somebody who was out hunting while the village was, attacked in the night. And he came back and he didn't go to the village or the tower. He tried to go in a different direction. He runs into the Numenorians and tells them what's happening, and that's how they know where to go, and that it's an urgent thing. Just, tons of things that could have happened that would have heightened the stakes, really set up our ultimate payoffs. The final thing that I don't think either of us made a note of this prior, but I did want to put it out there, was there's a conversation between Galadriel and Halbrand after the interrogation of Adar, during which Galadriel almost kills him. It cuts to Galadriel and Halbrand sitting in the woods, and they kind of start hinting at a love story, or at least mutual attraction between Galadriel and Halbrand. That's at least how I took it. I think Halbrand says something about how fighting next to her gave him this feeling that he wants to bind to his very being. And Galadriel says, "I felt it too," which
I didn't catch that as romantic.
I didn't catch it on my first watch. I only caught it on my second. And the first thing I said was there was actually no scenes of them fighting next to one another. She was galloping around and he was galloping around, and they were doing it separately. Nonetheless, that is a nitpicky thing, but we do get a hint of some sort of deepening connection, almost romantic, between them. And I just wonder if that's something that we're going to see in the last couple episodes of the show. Although I don't know if we're going to get more. Well, no, I think the preview did indicate that we'd at least have some time in the Southlands next episode.
Yeah, because there's that, what we thought might be a dream. In one of the trailers, we see what appears now to be the aftermath of Orodruin hitting this village and her standing up with all the ash all around her.
In which the entire village is completely destroyed, either knocked over, on fire, or charred, and she is still alive with all of her hair intact.
After standing straight in front of thousands of degrees of heat.
Yes. It just, a couple months ago, I went to Italy and we went to Pompeii, and, we saw, obviously, 2,000 years later. Yeah. But it's not just like a bad thunderstorm. It is apocalyptic in nature. And they demonstrated that somewhat with the eruption and this big shockwave that seemingly had no consequences, because even like none of the cups even fell over on those tables from this shockwave. It's just like little things like that. And then you had these, magma or these lava bombs falling and people seemingly dying and things catching on fire, and Galadriel's just standing there, defiant.
We're in shock. I think that's
or in shock, but it's, again, even fantasy worlds have rules about the physical. The physical world has rules. The magical world has rules, and we like our characters and we feel for our characters because they thrive within those rules. And if you throw those away, it causes dissonance in the audience, and it's less, the enjoyment is diminished because it becomes clear that the characters are only surviving because they're the characters, not because they are particularly gifted in any specific physical or mental or magical sense.
All right. Well, our last segment of our show is called Nerdy Enough. This week, Sam is going to quiz me to see if I am nerdy enough to host this podcast. We are covering all things Tolkien in these quizzes. Once we move on to other topics, like I said at the beginning, please jump onto our Facebook page, Elves, Rings, and Nerdy Things, and help us decide what our next series will be. If we move on to Andor, which is the new Star Wars series on Disney Plus, our quizzes will be Star Wars themed. So they will follow whatever the topics are that we are covering. So Sam, what do you have for me today?
I have 10 questions for you. I hope this is a well-balanced quiz. We will find out. We've had it's been up and down, but let's jump into it. So question number 1 in Not Nerdy Enough. Daughter of Orodreth and romantically linked to both Gwyndor and Turin, who was the elf maiden taken captive by orcs and killed tragically after the fall of Nargothrond?
So luckily, Sam messed up when he first asked the question, and I'm going to edit it out. And he re-asked the question, and it gave me time to think. Findulis.
Correct.
I might be pronouncing it wrong, but
I think pronunciation is Finduilis.
Oh, is there an I in there?
Yes.
Okay.
That is correct. Next question. What region north of Mordor and east of Rohan was referred to by Gimli as a maze of razor-sharp rocks through which Sam and Frodo navigated?
The Emyn Muil.
Correct. Who was the wife of Erendil, the mariner, and mother to Elros and Elrond?
This is your fatty lumpkin from last week.
I can't remember if we got her name in the last episode of the show, but she was referenced.
The funny thing is, we talked about his dad so much that I have to think back, because I looked at like all of those lineage lines. So I'm going to pause for a second to think, but I'm going to edit the pause out. Elwing.
Nice pull.
Is it right?
That is correct.
Okay, good.
Yes.
I legit, like last week when we were recording, I had the what do you call it? The lineage,
the family trees
tree,
or whatever. Yeah.
Oh God. Okay.
Yeah. Nice pull.
I'm redeeming from my 2.5 right from like 3 weeks ago.
Indeed. And I'm redeeming myself as a quiz writer. Question 4. According to the Legendarium, how many Palantiri were brought by the survivors of Numenor to Middle-earth?
It's either 2 numbers. It's either 7 or 9. I'm going to go with 7.
7 is correct.
Okay.
I will not ask you to name the locations
at
which they were held.
The ones during the Third Age, during the events of the Third Age, Isengard in Orthanc. There was one in Anúminas, one in Gondor. Those are the only 3 that I'm really relatively aware of. But in the events of the books, it's the one in Isengard. Denethor still has his in Gondor. And then the third one has been lost and is in the hands of Sauron.
That was
Anúminas, right?
Well, so I think there was a Palantir in Minas Ithil, which was captured by the ring wraiths, and that was taken to Sauron. Okay. And then you also had another one that was in Osgiliath, and that one fell into the river. Yep.
But the important ones that are actually referenced in the books or in the Lord of the Rings are the 3.
Yeah, I think in the book timeline, in the Lord of the Rings timeline, there's the Orthanc stone, and there is the Ithil stone and the Minas Tirith Seeing Stone, and those are the only 3. All the other 4 are lost. I think some of them were lost in the fall of Anúminas and Osgiliath.
Okay.
All right. Next question. Speaking of Anúminas, At the Battle of Fornost, who made the prophecy that the Witch King of Angmar would not fall to the might of a mortal man?
This one I don't know, so I'm just going to guess Elrond.
Very close. Glorfindel.
Ah, a great character.
A great character. I wrote this question, and I've heard this pronounced so many times. I'm going to struggle with the pronunciation myself. Calenardhan was the province of Gondor that became known as what realm in the later Third Age? I can spell that if you need me to. Calenardhan.
Is that the one? Oh gosh, is it Tol Eressëa? I can't remember the name of the kingdom that comes in Return of the King to help.
Oh, are you thinking of Dol Amroth?
Dol Amroth.
Yeah, that is different. Calenardhan is the original name for Rohan.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was given to the Eorlingas or the Eothed in thanks for coming to Gondor's aid during some war.
Okay. Yeah, I was thinking Dol Amroth.
That is one of the great scenes. We didn't get
'Cause-
any of that in the books, or excuse me, in the movies, but the books, like that's a really cool, like the
Yeah.
entrance of the knights from Dol Amroth.
Isn't that Prince Imrahil?
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's actually, he's one of the people that saves Faramir. Yeah. Great scene in the books. All right. Question 7. During the First Age, who was the leader of the elves of the Falas, Teleri, who lived on the coast of Beleriand?
Finwë.
Círdan the Shipwright.
I forgot he was Teleri.
That's right. So did I, actually, because
I always associate him with Noldor.
Exactly. I was thinking the same thing, because there was a scene in the dinner with Durin and the elves where I think Elrond makes a toast, like to the union of Noldor and Khazad-dûm or something like that. And it made me think, is that the proper utilization of Noldor? Because there were non-Noldorans who lived in Lindon, and Círdan was one of them. And even Elrond, his lineage is not entirely Noldoran.
Well, they haven't really referenced anybody else but Noldor at this point in the show, so maybe that's
true.
what they're saying.
That is true. All right. Question 8. Dior, heir of King Thingol, was slain by whom?
I'm going to guess, is it Sauron's wolf?
No, he was slain by the sons of Fëanor.
Oh, okay.
And I
One
think
of the
that was the
kinslayings.
second kinslaying.
Yeah.
Because he had a Silmaril. All right, next question. Which of the 3 successor realms to Arnor was the first to fall to the Witch King of Angmar?
I'm going to make you give me multiple choice on this one.
Okay, the 3 kingdoms are Arthedain, Cardolan, and Rhudaur.
I'm trying to think of which one sounds like it'd be the farthest north.
Which one sounds like it would be the most evil?
I'm going to guess Rhudaur because it has RHU like rune.
That is correct.
That's just a complete guess. And thankfully it was similar to rune. And the assist from you for telling me that it might sound evil.
That's always how I think. I was like, yeah, that's a Rhudaur. That doesn't sound very good.
They sound pretty shitty.
They sound evil. That's an evil sounding country. All right, final question in Not Nerdy Enough. In the First Age, who was the king of the eagles?
Oh
in the
my gosh.
First Age.
I can only think of Gwai here.
Well, I'll tell you what. I wasn't even going to try to pronounce Gwai here, so you can get credit for knowing the king of the eagles in the Third Age.
Yeah, I couldn't think of the First Age.
The First Age king of the eagles is Thorondor.
Yeah, I'll take that.
All right, so let's see here. That is 1, 2,
I got 6, right? Maybe
6 out of 10, which is a
I'll
good
take that.
score. Good score. Some of these questions were a little bit harder. You are nerdy enough to continue hosting this podcast. Should we take a second and look ahead? We have 2 more episodes this season, and then I think we want to do at least one kind of wrap up summary episode.
Season recap, yeah.
Season recap. And then we will move into whatever is next. And so if you, listener, have a preference for what that would be, do you want us to talk about the Star Wars show Andor on Disney Plus? Do you want us to talk about The Witcher? Do you want us to talk about what were the other two options?
The two options you suggested were House of the Dragon on
That's
HBO and creating a fantasy book club.
Yes. So if you have a preference for those among those four, or if you have another idea from outside of those ideas, let us know. Go to Els Rings and Nerdy Things on Facebook. Shoot us an email, elsringsnerdythings@gmail.com, and let us know what you want us to talk about. Until then, Sean, we are signing off.
Yeah, the only other thing I have to add is just please like, share, follow, do all the podcast stuff. If you like us, keep listening. Until next week, we will see you on the internet.
Stay nerdy.